Yeah. So we are recording round three. So this is an example of the things that I tell the Google people I have to work with of why all of Europe does its free video conferencing with Skype and not their infernal machine. All right.
Yeah,
So I've posted that. Um, no magic. That's funny. I like that one. And right. So Mr. Miller, how are you
I'm
after a little drama there?
I am doing very well. Very well after about a half an hour of trying to connect through the Googleverse.
And you know what? It wasn't even just Google. So we had the first one probably was the first one with that endless, with the 1 minute delay and the repeating sound was probably Google. Then the next one, it looked like it was my technological challenge, and then the next time it was your technological challenge, and then it was Google again when the public event kept switching to private every time I tried to edit it. So
It's crazy. I've never had a situation where you could see me through the computer and hear me through the phone, but not
yeah.
both at the same. That was insane.
And people think the robots are coming for our jobs. But anyway. All right, so just I'm writing in
In
caps
tongue.
lock. Post questions here. We're Skyping instead, or on the Twitters. Great. Okay, so actually, fortunately, because people did ask questions in advance, I have I've written them out here. Now, this was a good idea. This was your idea to have a chat because it was based on looking at some of the similarities or not even that areas of overlap between your
Yeah,
book and my recent book to say, well, actually, there's potentially some value for people out there on a live Google Hangout to to kind of
abs-
engage with these ideas.
like I said, I had everybody in the strategic sorcery course, of course, started reading Chaos Protocols, and because it's just so directly relevant. And then I had, within the span of a day, somebody was like, it looks like Gordon ripped off the macro enchantment, micro enchantment thing. And then somebody else was like, Jason, it looks like you borrowed the Gordon's enchanting in steps from Rune Soup for your course. And I was just like, nobody borrowed anything really.
If anything, we probably stole it from someone 100 years ago or more.
Absolutely, absolutely.
No, but I think that's one of the reasons why we get on so well is potentially it might even be a personality component of wanting to or just being able to see the world in little pieces almost.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, there's certainly a lot of that. The which is why I guess from the majority of questions, I kind of grouped them into topic areas. And the first one was, hilariously enough, I'm writing in a book in a Google book. Yeah. The first topic area was optionality. So we got a couple of questions about, firstly, how we define it. So you can go first on that one. Very nice. Yeah. See, we both stole.
Absolutely. Actually, the idea of optionality, I didn't even have words for it really, but I was, ever since leaving Nepal and kind of devolving from Buddhism and reopening my mind up, I kind of let go of the idea that we need to have this goal, we need to have this perfect place to wind up at. And it's much more about the trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
And that if we just keep going, practically speak in terms of sorcery, if you keep making new options, keep road opening, as you had pointed out, it might be the only spell you ever need.
Yeah, if I had to pick one, if you're playing Desert Island Disc, that's the one.
But also mystically, doing things that cut through the noise and getting down into the deeper mind. I think, not to quote Paulo Coelho, but in Witch of Portobello, the witch is sort of like, well, you sit down and you want to be different at the end. And they're like, different how? And she's like, I don't know. How can you get somewhere that you don't, into the unknown if
Yeah.
you can, So the whole idea of, I started framing things a couple of years ago in terms of trajectory for people. Like, just worry about heading. Don't worry about being at a specific place. And it, when you wrote about optionality and tied Taleb's theory into that, I was just like, oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's I took a couple of words from his most recent book, actually from some of the earlier ones as well. I've read them all, and he's my second or third favorite person on Twitter. But so for optionality, a definition could be kind of stealing the definition he uses for anti-fragile, which is position your life in such a way that it gains from volatility rather than is negatively impacted by it.
Right.
And for me, optionality is like the fuck off money or the fuck you money of the gods. Like, you have the capacity to respond positively to a range of things that you will never see coming that do in fact actually happen. And
right.
That seems to me a very good way of thinking about short and medium term practical enchantment. Funnily enough, I get why people don't. So human psychology is almost directly inverse to how probability works. So humans have a tendency to overestimate short-term changes and underestimate long-term changes. Whereas if you look at probability, things are kind of highly unpredictable in the short term, but very predictable in the long term. So one coin flip versus 100,000 coin flips, or 11 and 100,000, you can start to see that. Same thing with smoking at an airport because you're scared of flying. Like, you have a mismatch between how humans view risk and opportunity and how it actually works in life.
Right.
And for me, funnily enough, this is why the sigil piece works so well for me. There's nothing inherent in there's nothing inherent in any form of practical enchantment that kind of belongs to a particular realm. But the way you go about creating multiple sigils is you can't not think in pieces or stages by doing that. It kind of forces you to do it. So some of the questions we're going to get to when we get down to the sigil section is like, what do you do if they're not working? What are this? And I'm like, well, they work. So I suspect the leak is somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I know people want shortcuts, but this is an unusual system. It was invented by an artist, so it doesn't have things like a launch sequence. You're not doing repairs on a 747. Like it's a way of engaging with your short and medium term risk profile, essentially.
Right.
And that, for me, when it comes to practical enchantment, and I mean, this would be something you would certainly say as well, I suspect. But when it comes to practical enchantment in that sense, the best skills you can learn to improve your magic are tangential to it. And it's things like this. Basically, I don't care if you don't think you're good at maths. Read Anti-Fragile until you understand it.
Absolutely. I'm always telling, because what happens is magicians start to view the world and the process for everything through the lens of magic, and magic is great at affecting things. So my definition of magic is not that it causes change, is that it influences change.
That's good.
So, which means you have to be a little bit adept. You have to be as cunning about the things that you're trying to influence. So, when it comes to optionality and the asymmetric upside of the market, you're investing in index funds because you're banking on market efficiency overall, as opposed to this one company that you believe in, and if it fails, boom, it's you're very fragile. Whereas if you're banked in an index fund, not only are you not spending all day trying to research what this company is doing, but you're banking on the overall optionality and the asymmetric upside of the market. And with strategic sorcery, we like to pull things apart. So in cases like a court case, a lot of people would be like, well, you do a court case spell. In strategic sorcery, we'd say, well, let's look at all the moving parts here. You've got, if you are the defendant, you've got your lawyer who you can kind of pump up, and then you've got the prosecution who you want to confuse and bind and otherwise send screaming to the madhouse, and then you've got the judge who you want to sweeten and bring that thing, and all of that can still all happen under an umbrella of, hey, let me win. But then you've got all these little things. So even if the nugget, like, it's just you're not able to influence that prosecutor. He's got magical protection and just hates your guts and so passionately that no magic is ever going to move him. Then you've got these other moving parts as well, so that you wind up succeeding. And then, of course, you do all the things that are appropriate. All the time I'm running into people that are, they put 90% of their effort into the magic aspect of it, which is why you get things like, I evoked boon for wealth and I won $50 in Atlantic City the next day. And it's like, well, that's great. Yay, magic works. But you tied that, that's a lot of effort for $50. It would be better if you tied that magic into something that created options and that you knew a little bit about, that you had some knowledge and interest and passionate about to make money consistently, to get yourself on a trajectory. So.
But see, this kind of comes back to there's a statement beside what you were saying about magic being a change influencer rather than being a thing. People get stuck in it as a worldview, and so I have this metaphor. Chris Knowles and I talk about this a bit, that there's a tendency, and I would even say a slim majority of magicians fall into this, which is they mistake. It's kind of, so being interested in magic is kind of like being a mechanic without a car. Like, you're obsessed with cars and you tinker with cars, but you don't get to go anywhere. Magic is a car. Like, go and do stuff. Go and do things that aren't. Go and do other things that you like. Climb a mountain. I don't know. Take heroin with prostitutes in Shanghai. I don't know, but go and do things. And it's that people are. It's the worldview, like the hypothetical Atlantic City scenario there. That whole process is, Boone probably instigated that. He probably wanted to go to Atlantic City. That means nothing about wealth. That means nothing about...
Right.
Yeah, and you're just kind of caught in this loop. It's funny, we spoke about the Simonomicon before, but I think it's even in the Gates, or it might be in the Justifying the Necronomicon book, whatever that one's called, where a lot of people get caught in that first kind of Gate of the Moon delusion. So because magic is so exciting, and basically the first gate you go through is the one that says, so this stuff is real, this stuff works, and people just, and they're gone.
It's a world of mirrors, and you can spend your entire career there, because it for people that come to magic with the idea of having the psychic soap opera. You know these people. Well, there are 4 shamans cursing me, and like no reason, just being in the lunar sphere, having the astral mirror, it just reflects all that back at you, and
the goal is not, like, the way you get out is not to engage with it. The way you get out is to get out.
Exactly.
To go through, and that is it's a reasonably good metaphor for people who are fairly long lived in it. And I absolutely get the appeal. I would be very happy living in a wizard's tower in Micronesia, just fucking about with grimoires for the rest of my life. I say I'd be very happy. That'd be good for a couple of years. I might in fact get bored, but like I get the appeal. I get the appeal of just like messing about with this because it's not only real and fun. You can very easily make the philosophical case that it is more important than the physical world, but that would be a trick, wouldn't it, Mr. Miller?
Yes, that would be a big trick. I still, despite my extensive training in Buddhism and Christianity, I am still. We're here. Let's be here.
Yeah. Just because it's some kind of illusion or whatever, like we're still here.
Absolutely.
That's that Crowley thing where Crowley said the Buddha should have known better. That's more or less what he meant. Like, yeah, fine, have that realization, but like, don't go.
That's why I like the Vajrayana.
Okay, fair enough.
That's why I like the Vajrayana. It's a lot more sukha, less dukkha, a lot more joy, less suffering.
Nice.
Let's focus on the love and bliss and the yogas.
Cool.
Getting a different noblewoman to have sex with the sixth Dalai Lama every night. That's the good stuff.
Yeah.
If you're the sixth Dalai Lama.
Yeah. All right. So staying back on optionality, we were both asked for specific examples of either it or how it's used in our lives. I made a few notes, so I'll go first if you want to use that as jumping off points. My first and best one has been moving. Has been being able to have that capacity to be able to go either where opportunity is or away from things where there's less of it. And I've done that a bunch of times, and that has worked. So optionality in that case, like I can gain or I'm unharmed by volatility. So if I lose a job in a place or so on, my life is constructed in such a way that I can just get in my gypsy wagon and fuck off. So that one has been, if I was to look at it, reconfiguring a sense of place and kind of not falling for a wider narrative. I mean, I'm not in debt, I don't own a house, and I don't own any children, so it's less complicated. But that I constructed it that way. I constructed it because that was a potent source of optionality for me. The other one is to have to have fuck you money. I think it's called in the US. I don't have US levels of fuck you money. But that kind of helps. Like this is, it's a Taleb paraphrase, but money is stored optionality.
Oh yeah.
So there is a very good case for liquidity, and that's been another one that's worked for me. And speaking of cash, the other one has been like how you gain from global volatility is things like currency trading, which I seem to have a little bit of a knack for. And again, this year I haven't really moved much out of USD. Before the pound went below 150, I just moved to US dollars. The other thing is, if you don't understand what's going on, be prepared to lose all your money. And I'm not, so I'm just standing back. But funny enough, that volatility thing has generally worked for me. What was that?
You haven't moved it all into Hong Kong dollar yet.
No. I think
the theory being that Hong Kong dollar is pinned to the U.S., but then if the U.S. tanks, they'll just go, we're not pinned to that anymore.
Yeah. the U.S. will be the last one standing. So
I think so.
That's what I'm like. If I look at 2016 and I look at the sort of geopolitical risk around the world, I hope the UK leaves the EU. Even if it doesn't, one of the reasons the pound is so weak at the moment is people are expecting it to, and markets, trade on the rumor and sell the fact. And yeah, fuck only knows what's going to go on with the euro. So you have all this money and it doesn't have anywhere else to go. I'm not going anywhere near the yen, and China keeps devaluing either by stealth or overtly. There's really nowhere else for it to park. So, but in theory, like positioning assets, although that's money's kind of it's an asset. Why not? Positioning so that you can adapt quickly is kind of the beginnings of optionality, and making peace with the fact that a lot of stuff will not go your way and you'll get it wrong. Like, oh, I thought this was going to happen and then this did. So rather than crying over it, move faster. And I guess those are my three main cases for it. So it's been quite good to be able to have moving and liquidity as a career backstop. So I kind of know how far I can push things. I can push things the whole way. Usually, usually people don't want to do things like get made redundant, but that seems to be how I leave jobs. I spend 6 months engineering my own redundancy because you get more money at the end of it.
Yeah.
But I can do that because I'm not scared. People are terrified during these processes where I'm like, pick me, teacher. I guess that's it. It's a very chaos magic thing in the sense that it's commonly misunderstood. I like chaos. I'm at home in it. So
Right.
yeah. All right. Optionality. You go while I drink.
Well, there are a lot of things different now that I've had the kids and trying to provide the Pleasant Valley Sunday kind of lifestyle. But I'm with you. I moved to the city, in my case, Philadelphia. And then when I wanted to create more options as far as learning Tantra, I moved to Nepal for a little between 99 and 2000. And I mean, literally no plan, just showed up and was like, hey, what's going on? But it's all, if you can go to a place where it's all happening. So, now that I'm an older dude and I do have kids and I do own a house, we still want to move places that create options.
Well, that isn't like there's yeah, a suburb is an option.
Right.
London is a young city. I will eventually age out of it when the risk reward. Well, the things that are bad about it start to outweigh the things that are good about it, which is why when you commute to work, you don't see too many successful people 45 and up, 50 and up on the tube. People say not to this and they move to the home counties or somewhere else. It's a very New York story. New York is another young city for that reason. It's amazing and you make very good money, but it's only amazing for 10 or so years, and then you start to go, you get very lethal weapon and you are too old for this shit.
Well, see, now I'm in a situation where, we were living in New Jersey and jobs were plentiful, but now I work for myself and I can work from anywhere. So now we are sort of looking at the rest of the country going like, well, where does the money go further? If I'm making X amount in New Jersey, and I decide to move someplace down south, let's say Florida, that goes a hell of a lot further. So, we're looking at creating options that way. I know some people that are up in the higher brackets, the 7 and 8 figure brackets, and they create optionality by getting second passports and doing the whole 5 flags thing so that if the nation goes to pots, they show up at the airport, I live in the Bahamas, let me on the plane. So, there are all these ways to create optionality by moving and taking advantage of the different situations. Those of us that live and work on the net, I don't know why there aren't more of us like living in Croatia.
Probably because they all have to use Google Hangouts and it's shit.
Oh my god!
Yeah. So funnily enough, I think
so many places where it goes further.
Yeah, and when I constructed the book, this is kind of answering on a macro level what we're talking about with optionality and being able to do things like move. The reason one of the kind of opening chapters, one of the earliest chapters is called Becoming Invincible is I'm surprised and dismayed at the persistence of fear in magic. Thank you. People are scared about things that are going to happen to them and you go, what's the big fucking deal? You'll die. That is literally the worst outcome. And that is not don't try not to die, but if it happens, that's the thing that happens. And people are scared for job interviews or they won't know anyone in new town. And I'm like, do you practice magic? Do you even lift? What is this? And that's why I sort of think I'm going to front load the book with Becoming Invincible. Have an experience, because optionality is fine then. I will if we ended up with no money, I'd work in a pub, I'd do whatever. Like, I don't care. That's just like, that's the thing that I have to do. And I think I kind of get why the questions were asked, but that's how I do it. It's very movement based and with liquidity. But the other part of it is, yeah, be fearless in some way. Like, be correctly fearless, and magic does in fact offer that.
Yeah, it does. I was telling somebody recently that when I was in high school, I was just a scared little wussy, you know, of life and everything. And then shortly after graduating, I just went through these experiences where I realized that, and I had to kind of do things to step out of
By
my
the way, I'm
comfort zone.
listening. I'm like, this is really interesting. I'm just trying to catch all the questions,
No,
so
no,
I
no,
keep
I
going.
understand.
This is
So,
gonna look like I'm really, really rude on the video, and then there.
so I mean, I remember going out to this tower at the beach, one of these blinking light towers to tell boats where to go, and I spent the night up there because
Do you
once I
mean a
got up there,
lighthouse? Do you not know the word lighthouse, Mr. Miller?
it's not a lighthouse. This is
Okay, it's
this
a
is literally
blinking
just a
lighthouse.
steel
Okay,
tower.
all
Oh,
right,
I live near Barnegat Light, so I've
all right,
got one
all
of
right.
those famous lighthouses
I
you can
thought
practice.
somehow you'd gone your whole life without hearing the word lighthouse.
No, no, we've got lighthouses, but this isn't that. This isn't like that. This is like a little tiny metal thing that nobody has business climbing up there.
Okay.
So I spent the night up there, and then I just started doing things, and that's when I decided, you know what? I don't care that I don't really even have enough money. I'm going to go spend a few months in Europe, and uh, kind of things like that, and break out.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got comfortable again. Kids, I got scared again when business happened. So I was working a regular job and treating strategic sorcery as my side income, which is also a great way to create optionality, multiple streams of income. But I was doing strategic sorcery even when I was making twice as much at that as I was at the day job. I was still like, I can't leave someone giving me a paycheck. It's too safe. And of course, it's not safe. It's not safe at all. But so I do understand the fear, and I have slipped back into that mindset from time to time. But every time I say, you know what, enough with this, I'm throwing off the shackles and going with it, it works out. Because again, there is this, not everything works out,
Mm.
not every aspect of it works out. But if you're set your trajectory and you have a decent head on your shoulders, you don't even have to be, brilliant. Just you have a decent head on your shoulders, it will work out. It's that asymmetric upside. It'll work out. This is why so many business people have so many failed businesses behind them, because they just keep at it. And,
Yeah.
the ones that stick make a load of money. The ones that don't stick, they don't stick.
Yeah. All right. Next topic area, a favorite of yours is offerings. Now, you said that that's a topic area you got a few questions about. The one I saw was something to do with offerings, obviously because we don't have the page open. Something to do with offerings to backyard spirits.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. Do you wanna take a run up at that, and then we'll talk offerings?
Well,
I'm collating the questions that people have been very kind to ask in
yes,
this
thank you.
kind of random ass way.
Thanks, everyone, for your great questions. So, backyard spirits, all sorcery is local. There's a reason why even some of the big guys that are in the grimoires have X amount of legions of spirits under their control. They outsource that. So there's a big deal in Tantra about working with lokapalas, to go outside and offer to spirits of the underworld, to the Nagas, to the Lu, to the Nyen, and you can think of these as, you know, the spirits of the horizon, if you want to think in Western terms, as dryadic spirits, and the spirits that are hanging around, you know, the spirits of your local place. And this is where this is what starts to make a great sorcerer, is they start to work with the area that they are in, and they, you know, they don't need the book with names and sigils. They can actually open themselves up, attract these spirits through offering and through kindness, and develop a relationship. And then every now and then you hold a big feast, and you get to know the locals, and say, you know, if anybody wants to work with me, let's have, you know, will you arrive under this sigil? If it doesn't give you a sigil, then you can set a sigil and say, will you work, you know, and recognize this? And that's how you get the spirit that lives in the lake behind you on your side. This is, you know, I live in the Pine Barrens, and the New Jersey Pine Barrens is just filled with all kinds of lore. We have our own witch, Pebby Clevenger. We have the Jersey Devil and the Blue Holes. And so I have a whole sort of mini grimoire of just local stuff that is only meaningful here.
Yeah.
And London, of course, is just chock full.
Yeah, but there's and I wonder how much of that is actually in the grimoires. I have these conversations with Jake where the vector that no one looks at, and it's in my Archaeology of Dragons presentation, is local monsters and local folklore. Because if you try to, and it's a fool's errand, but he's going ahead with it, you know, if you try to kind of family tree the spirits, well, the grimoire spirits, obviously, there are bits that are kind of a guess, and there's, like, you know, in the 1200s, these ones we're not really sure, and these ones, and my guess is you need to find where we suspect that was written, and then wind back the clock in local folklore, and you'll have, like, a monster under a bridge, and you'll have a whatever. And I think that's the vector. And just so everyone's clear, not that people would hopefully do this, that doesn't mean find out what they are and attempt to summon them if you live in Arizona. They're there to kind of, you know, if you want to summon that particular spirit that is probably a local monster, you get to go to Germany and find it.
Yep.
It's there as an example of how you kind of end up with your own X-Men team. And that's how you know what's going on. And they're person specific, which is actually why that's kind of jumping ahead to some of the answers to the questions I was going to do a little bit later on. For me, I don't actually trying to work out. I don't think I explicitly leave offerings to my backyard spirit. My backyard is probably more offering than lawn at the moment, but we have terrible soil. It's all just river clay, and it clogs up. I certainly leave a lot of offerings in the yard, so I have things, sigils and such hanging in the tree in the back, and we have rosemary and St. John's wort that I feed with red wine every St. John's Eve. We used to have a foxhole in the corner where I'd put, like, just throw old sigils. But in terms, and I certainly pour out drinks and so on, either on the lawn and there's a patch that I get to, like a dog, I get to dig up and close back over if it's anything that goes underneath it, because that seems to work really well. Fortunately, as I said, the grass doesn't grow, especially in winter, underneath the tree, so I'm not actually ruining lawn in any way. But they're like a badly behaved dog. I will bury things if need be. So my yard is kind of that. I have a house that isn't haunted, so. And nothing new is getting in with the things I've got up. So there isn't even really... I don't have a house spirit procedure where I live. I have spirits that live here, and I have kind of keeping the space amenable to the kind of spirits I like, but I don't actually light a candle to a house spirit. I used to live in a place in Glebe in Sydney that was run by essentially a mad late 1800s alchemist. He was a pharmacist who kind of was cooking whatever the 1890s version of meth was in the basement of this mansion at the top of the hill. So that house was haunted, and a couple of those ghosts were fun, and the house had a personality. So I did then, but in this place, not so much. But that, for me, I mean, if we want to widen it out, because there's another question that's loosely related to offerings. I know you're very big on it.
Huge.
Yeah, I think
I mean, honestly, even if you just you start to make offerings to what I call the four classes. So you've got divinities, then you've got sort of guardian spirits, big spirits, you know, powerful, etc. Then all the local beings, and then beings that you owe some kind of debt to, that are pissed off at you for, you know, driving or taking a piss on the lawn or whatever it is you
oh God,
did that.
I do that too.
if you make regular offerings to these four classes, everything starts to go smoother. Like with magic, and you know, I've actually had people complain after start doing this. Like, I don't need to do, like, I miss doing sorcery for every little thing, because all of a sudden things just start working out quicker.
Like, yeah, well, that, I mean, when we come down to questions about what to do when sigils don't work, I'm like, that's not the question you should be asking, because yeah, you end up in a situation, and it's not. There are two things that happen, because there is a danger of appearing, you know, arrogant or overconfident when you say, I don't do that much anymore because I don't need to. Because the other thing that happens is when you start to look at your life in a magical capacity, and particularly when it comes to having that sort of confidence in short-term enchantments and what you say trajectory, less things become an emergency. So you might not be growing as a magician, but you're certainly growing as a person.
Right.
And that's the bit that I think people fail to append when they're saying, like, well, I've been doing this offerings work, because the offerings work factually, well, that's a preposterous thing to say in a magical discussion, but I will 1,000,000% second that if you did nothing else but offerings, your life would be immeasurably improved. And there are a couple of reasons for that, and particularly the way you described it. It's like a more interesting gratitude journal, because you do start to become aware on a daily basis of kind of the better things in life, and also the things that maybe you've done wrong or upset people over. And if you focus on those, if you just did that rather than offerings, and you focused on those things on a daily basis, your life will improve. Your life will actually improve, because your perspective on it will change, and hopefully the amount of times you upset people will decrease over time. Yeah. So it works in these layers, but that's only about 40% of where I think this works. The other part of it is, and I've kind of done a very chaos magic thing of running through lists of either beings or classes of beings over the years to give offerings to. And they all work, and they all have different effects. So I'm like, well, there's something else. There is another mechanism of action involved in offerings, and even, I mean, I know we talk, and I hate that it's true, but I know we talk about the essentiality of meditation, but like, whisper it. If you did nothing but offerings, you'd be fine. Like, seriously, you know, the meditation thing. This is, I mean, my answer to the sigil question is, my sigils aren't working. I'm like, well, they didn't really work for me until I started meditating either, because that's how it works. Like, the leak is never where you think it is, you know?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, offerings. Anything else we want to add?
Just, you know, as you were talking, I was thinking at a real basic level, you got to imagine you have two neighbors. One of those neighbors is like, I want this, want all the time. Gimme. That's a type of magician. And then you've got another neighbor who's like, hey, have some, you know, stuff that I barbecued. Have some stuff from my garden. Here, you know, try this out, and let's go, you know, who's always kind of like giving back a little bit. And then you find out he needs something. Which one are you more likely to respond positively to? even without asking. By doing regular offerings, you get to be that guy
Yeah.
who's sort of like, I'm given something, and this goes back to your idea of using anima sola too. You're developing a reciprocal relationship with the dead. You're doing something nice for the lost souls in purgatory simply out of doing it as a regular practice. Then you develop real allies.
Well, because that one works really well, and it's a very clever idea because it doesn't have a name associated with it. So you are like actually just talking about essentially restless dead, right?
Okay.
It doesn't have a name associated with it. You can't convince yourself that you are, really just offering something to a particular angel or developing an offering practice with a particular saint out of the goodness of your heart. If underneath, you're kind of, you do this, everyone does, but if out of the kindness of your heart and then a year later you're going to ask for something. Anima Sola has a short circuit component to it. But I just found that it worked. Like I found that through Jose's Cyprian book. And I remember my Catholic grandmother talking about praying for the souls in purgatory, but I hadn't realized that if I looked down the kind of Latin Catholic path, that there would be this really convenient way of thinking about it and engaging with it. I'm looking at my little Anima Sola card now. Like, I'd recommend that. And funnily enough, when you're talking about engagement with the spirit world, the reason I put in Chaos Protocols the part about the skull experiments was I think that is the kind of smoking gun about how it works. It's the most remarkable recorded seance in history, and it took a year to get started. So they had this group in the east of England who would sit for a seance once a week, and they'd have the same spirits on the other side that they ended up calling the spirit team. And after a year, the spirit team started doing the most amazing sort of apported object manifestation, kind of really cool stuff that's all recorded. But they said specifically that we can do this because we've had that regular contact over the year. Like the channel is cleared. So if people are trying to look for kind of supporting evidence, if you will, or a model, that's people that's dead people in the spirit world saying, we can do this because we've had that happen. And it gets to the point, when I actually sort of had this discussion with Alicia while writing the book. And actually, I'm going to ask you this question because you have a very specific... Well, the Course does a very specific thing, but I struggle when people ask specific questions like, what do I do to make my sigils work better? Because I wonder if a magician isn't a bit like an ecosystem. So I don't know what are the things you're doing, and it becomes very difficult, which is also why I said I share rather than teach. It becomes very difficult. I don't know why your sigils aren't working. There's a dysfunction in the ecosystem here. Like, it isn't the sigils, it's how other things that are going on here, and because it is so person and place specific, the deep structure of it is transferable in some respects, but in other respects it isn't. And then the rest of it is you. And I think I know for some people it's scary, right? So I guess maybe that's it, that they want to know that there is a system before they go in. It doesn't work like that. You just got to go in and get scared, become invincible.
It's not the wand. It is.
Yeah. All right, so this is... Oh, hang on, this is why I was confused. I thought we'd missed an offerings question. I've got a how do you use the crossroads? Like, what do you specifically do crossroad-wise? I have a crossroad anecdote because I don't have... I holiday to crossroads because it's very difficult in West London to find a quiet crossroad, unsurprisingly. I do have one in a graveyard, but they close the gates at sundown.
See, when I lived in Philadelphia, I used to have to seek out a true crossroad, not cross streets, but a real crossroad. So I would actually use like paths in the park. Thankfully, Philadelphia has the largest inner city park in America, Fairmount Park. So it's even got a Rosicrucian cave in it from Kelpius. So There's lots of crossroad opportunities there, and then now in the Pine Barrens, I go out to areas that are not widely known. But what do you do there? Depends on what you're doing. If you're going to meet the devil, then you take an offering and you show up before dawn with the intent of meeting the devil. And if you're showing up at if you're leaving offerings for a crossroads spirit, then you go and you leave that at the crossroads and say thanks and walk away without looking back. And if you're going to do something with Hecate, I specifically like three-way crossroads that are at the edge of a town or city. So the one crossroad is the sort of the ring road, the loop, the beltway, and then the other one leads into it, because that's the real three-way crossroad. It's the liminal, like, this is the edge of civilization. Beyond the here is where it gets all wild and crazy. So,
I like that crossroad, cross street thing. That's probably quite useful. I know decent ones in the countryside in the directions I go more regularly, so in the kind of Glastonbury direction or what have you. And that's what I mean when I say I holiday to crossroads. I know where they are, where I'm going somewhere regularly. My first one, and I think it must have been in that what turns out to be not wildly accurate Dr. Hyatt book from the early 90s, Urban Voodoo and whatever it's called. And there was a Santeria folk charm in it, I think, which had to do with, like, rubbing yourself down with an egg or two eggs and leaving it in a brown paper bag with 7 coins at a crossroads. And I would have been 13, 14 when I did this. And it was in essentially a quiet suburban street, and I felt absurd wandering around the suburbs of Newcastle, Australia, with, like, a brown paper bag with an egg and some coins in it, looking for a crossroad that I couldn't, like, that I didn't know anyone who lived on either of the streets or start, because it's quite a small town, but also that there was no one around so I could leave it with enough time to get away. So that's, that was the beginning of my crossroad stuff. I think it's a very multi-purpose space if you get the right one. And when you do find one, so the sort of meeting the devil procedure in Chaos Protocols is, I did that in a bushland, or kind of bushland, like a bushy edge of a park by the Parramatta River in Sydney, and that had a true crossroad because it was paths as well. And no one ever really went down there because it was kind of gross and, like, muddy, mangrovey on the river, and you certainly couldn't swim in it. I'm pretty sure once I thought there was a spirit manifestation that may well have been a bull shark, which could have been a spirit manifestation in the river. So I kind of had it to myself, and I developed I do a similar thing here with the graveyard. I can sort of be left alone in. When you find a space that is amenable to you and you're amenable to it, it's actually quite multi-purpose, and the crossroad is that one. Like, it's a power place, so you can adapt anything to that. I've left sigils there, I've left offerings, I've done what have you, and it's kind of part of this X-Men or ecosystem thing that we're talking about, that magicians have places like that aren't necessarily theirs, but they have a good relationship with.
I'm a big proponent of people making sort of a magician's pirate map of their area.
Yeah.
Like, this is where I think the ley lines are. And, in Philadelphia, it was a way that parks lined up, and that there was, sometimes these energies sort of inspire the placement of things. So there was this wonderful Nandi bull that lined up with them right at Penn's Landing. And if you just shot in a straight line, you would hit, the first park you would hit would be Washington Square, which was also Philadelphia's Congo Square. And then you would go further out to Rittenhouse and further out. So there were, you could hit these ley line energies there. Other areas in the woods that there are particularly meaningful trees, that there are, graveyards that behave in a certain way. in that, the topography of every graveyard is a little bit different, so you
But
kind of
some of them are
yeah,
more multi-purpose than others. So
yeah.
my local one is, but a lot of the ones I encounter in the UK aren't, because they're essentially just graveyards. They're wonderful, and they're kind of a great place to sort of chat to the non-physical locals. But this one is a particularly invitational graveyard where I can use it, as I said, as a multi-purpose space. So offerings can be left there. It can be a place to go and leave things and pick them back up for activation and that kind of thing. And again, this comes back to the play spirit thing, where if you're not sure, do it anyway. And if something bad happens to you, don't do it again. Otherwise, that tends to be how I do things. I know people are like, well, how do you know if the spirit's talking to you or not? And I'm like, well, eventually you just know. But before that, just do it and see if something, see if something bad happens. Because
That's it.
sometimes it can. As I said, what's the worst that can happen? You could die. All right, what have we got? Crossroads. There's a big bit on sigils, but we need to talk about more. Actually, this one's good. How do the two? Oh, sorry, I'm guessing by the two books. And how do financial sorcery and chaos protocols blend? And then I had one that was a related question, which is, what is the difference between your teaching and Jason's teaching? The biggest one is I don't have a teaching. That was easy. So I guess you could blend either in with the cookbook. Let me rephrase. Where do you think the overlaps are?
I think our biggest overlaps are we care a lot about process and about how magic interacts with the things it's affecting, as opposed to looking for the best and oldest primary source for something, uh, um, or just kind of getting what is there's so many people that treat the spirits and magic like it's Pokemon, like, well, this one is more powerful than that one. Somebody just the other day on one of these, I think it might have been Chaos Magic Group, somebody had posted something like, the Grimoire Verum makes the Goetia look like, child's play. This is where the power is. And I'm like, no, it's where the attention is right now. It's not necessarily, more powerful. It's how you use the stuff. It's application that really gets it. So I think we overlap there. Somebody, Sarah had said, chaos magic protocols or chaos protocols is for like economic out of the box thinking, and financial sorcery is for more economic in the box thinking. And that is true. Financial sorcery was written with the idea that the world is not going to end. And I actually wanted to do a chat book, surrounding like how to prep for disaster, but it never.
Yeah.
You've written it already, so I don't.
Well, I don't. I hope not, because I don't think that's actually what's going to happen. I think a lot of things are permanently going away, but there are opportunities that are showing up that are orders of magnitude larger. It's just that people will have to, God save themselves, change or do things that they didn't think they'd ever want to do. The change resistance, this isn't specifically magic, this is more monocultural. I find hugely frustrating people in entire sectors that are going away. So 60% of Australian students, I was doing research for a piece yesterday, 60% of Australian students at university right now are training for jobs that will not exist in about 12 years' time.
Wow.
So, like, it was tremendously freeing writing that book, because I love how people, you've written something that I guess sort of pricks people with pens a little bit when I say I really, really liked it. I didn't agree with everything, and I'm like, why do you need to caveat it with that? Is there something in there that scared you? I don't agree with everything I read. A menu, a book, obviously not.
I Somebody was like, I don't agree with everything you've said, and I was just kind of like, dude, I've never agreed with anything anyone's ever said that I've ever met, including my closest teachers.
When do you do you open all your sentences like that? I don't agree with everything, but anyway, it was interesting. You put the pieces together and go, look, I have to say it. I have to kind of go. These are fundamental changes at an industrial revolution level that we're experiencing. And you don't want to be on the wrong side of the Industrial Revolution because you end up. I mean, this is in the book, but in the 19th century, about 40% of the American workforce was employed in agriculture. At the opening of the 20th century, it was 2% or a bit under. So that entire industry vanished, and the largest employment sector at the opening of the 20th century was domestic service. That's what happens when you get caught on the wrong side of a transition. So I have to write the book to say, this is the transition that's happening. Here are and it comes back to the trajectory thing. I don't know what kind of robot overlord supervisor positions will be available in 2025. They don't exist yet. The most desirable jobs in 2025 do not exist yet.
Yep.
So I can't tell you, dust up your resume and make sure you can be like a robot, blah, blah, blah. It's irrelevant at this point in the timeline. So
you said kind of the other day that was so on point. People want to know, how do we stop it? What do we do about it? It's happening. You deal with it. Magic is, people will point to magicians and when they have a problem in life, it could be anything. I mean, people are vicious. Like a magician has a health problem. People are like, they must not be a very good magician. Yeah. They're subject to to human frailty. So, magic is not about solving every last problem. Magic is about dealing with those problems, or it's a tool to help you deal with those problems. Practical sorcery is. And then, hopefully if you're doing real illuminative work to grow, to get to that primordial self, then you also are in a place where your sense of well-being is not rocked by all these things. I dig the sort of neo-stoicism that's been stirring all over the place, where people are finally grasping, instead of just telling ourselves everything's going to be great, we should wake up every day and say, every day I'm going to deal with disagreeable, ornery, evil, wrong-headed people that are going to do stupid things, and none of this is going to affect me because I find, I'm going to try to find my, my presence of awareness in something beyond that. So, the best you got to roll with it. You got to roll with it. So.
All right. This one's interesting, and I've just got it. I made very dodgy notes. I'm going to try and find it again because the question was about shamanic illnesses or shamanic views of contemporary Western illnesses and a special call out to autism. So what would be a shamanic view of autism? And I'm really into this stuff because I sort of follow, there's some great articles and a few academic pieces on kind of indigenous magical perspectives on the Western healthcare system. So I'm really, really into it. The autism one is particularly dangerous because, put it this way, the spirit world is not behind the catastrophic rise over the last 20 years in autism in countries that MMR vaccinate. So I get what they're saying, and I wonder about the autism thing because I actually have a friend in London, and she used to teach in an autistic school. Now she kind of runs teachers at an autistic school, and we have these discussions about there is there is a fundamentally changed consciousness. They're quite fascinating in how they see the world. So I actually helped with one kid who was, he's going to be like a Philip K. Dick guy. Like he was 11 and he's writing the most crazy science fiction. It was brilliant stuff. But because he's autistic, he's not sure. It's like the creative feedback isn't getting to him. So anyway, we chatted about that, about the impact or what that must be like. And I thought about it from a magical perspective. And again, it's quite useful to have a multi-part soul view, because essentially, if you're trying to look at how potentially an indigenous spirituality or even just an animist would look at someone with those conditions of reality, the differences to a normally operating human are exclusively in the car. They're not in the driver. Right. And as a result, which is, I mean, and you can interpret that. Frankly, I'm reasonably on board with the idea that some parts of this were consciously chosen prior to incarnation from talking to dead people and kind of looking into it. So I'm actually really interested in this kind of stuff because it must have been one of the first magical questions, like, why are you different to me? And it's that understanding of difference in the physical world. But when it comes to the healthcare system, I have stringent opinions about it, given that basically even like magical techniques that are absolutely basic bitch, meditation and so on, if they could be turned into pills, would be hailed as the new antibiotics. They would be the thing that permanently changes the medical landscape. But because they can't be turned into pills, they're not, or they're kind of pushed around the edges of the corporate sphere as mindfulness training or so on. And I find this really interesting, and I think that's going away. I think not only, well, in the US it's kind of escalated out of affordability for a lot of people, and I think that's a factor in driving the change towards, do you know what? You guys are actually just trying to sell pills because you're a company that's publicly listed, and that's what they do. And with the dissemination of information and the changing of the sort of cost-benefit analysis, I'm cautiously optimistic of not a return, but a repeat of indigenous and more natural medical treatments that combine sort of herb law with improved scientific understanding. Like I'm quite excited in the medium term about medicine in the West.
I am too. I am not going to comment directly on autism and shamanism.
It's a good question, though. Like
it's a great question.
Yeah.
And so when I questions like this, I mean, first of all, it's the spectrum.
Yeah, sure.
And people fall on that spectrum at different points, and some people, you know, what causes something at one end of the spectrum may be really different, just manifest in a way that seems autistic at the other end of the spectrum. So, you know, there are people who can be spirit touched and get interpreted as autistic. It's from a fantasy novel, Mr. Norrell, Jonathan Strange, Mr. Norrell, but there's a great thing in there, you know, that human beings are high in reason and low in magic, and fairies are low in reason and high in magic. So, you know, you could kind of look at that as fae-touched people, etc. Not that autistic people are lacking in reason, but there's to really speak on it, it's out of my wheelhouse. I want to be a doctor before I speak on it, or at least someone who has done massive amounts of research, not cursory research, not, oh, I know people whose children are autistic, because of course I do. Yeah. But before I comment on it, I really would would want to know my shit, and I don't have any plans on spending several years of research on that. So I am getting more and more comfortable with these days saying, I don't know.
I read a great article.
As far as as far as mindfulness in medicine, and let's not forget diet in medicine, I do think that the stranglehold of the pharmaceutical industry is going to be, or is diminishing some, because of the freedom of information, because you can't sweep it under the rug anymore. I mean, who doesn't have people on their Twitter or Facebook feed about the success stories of, say, cannabis oil or something like that?
No, absolutely. Or the other side of it, people who are severely damaged by these medicines that turns out shouldn't have been on the market. Because when you said freedom of information, I thought you meant Freedom of Information Act, which has showed that Prozac it does nothing, and they top drawed the results and made billions of it. So this is why the laws are getting so draconian. It's because more and more people are resisting it. More and more people going, you're actually just selling poison. In Prozac's case, it did nothing. That's their own findings. They just top drawed them. So all you got was side effects. That's astounding,
Now, see, this is where I find two sides of things. Because on the one hand, I find SSRIs and other kinds of drugs like that overprescribed. And the sort of the ADD, ADHD thing is being overdiagnosed and overprescribed. On the other hand, I know people that have benefited immensely from finding the right doctor with the right prescription, usually after some trial and error. And every now and then I'll meet people from the magic community who have, serious bipolar issues or serious depression issues. And they'll say, and I'll say, well, what have you tried? I've tried this alternative therapy, this alternative therapy, this alternative, this sweat lodge, this spell, 19 different spell casters. I don't take cases like that. And like everything under the sun. And I'll say, have you seen a doctor? Well, no. And I'm like, well, at the point you're willing to try like trepanation, maybe like exploring mainstream medicine is not.
Yes and no. I'm not sure how much. I mean, America it's 5% of the population and consumes 80% of the world's prescription medication.
Yeah.
So you guys take too many drugs, and it's very difficult to see inside the American hologram what you all look like from the outside, because that 95% of us manage to share the other 20%. That's what's going on, and so there are in theory. I mean, my father's a psychiatrist. There are in theory some pill-based treatments for these things. I think maybe what this question was getting at. I read an article about it a few years ago as well. What a shaman sees when he goes into a mental health facility in the West. And it's kind of what you were saying, that the diagnostic tools will be different. So we will say, here on the spectrum for autism, and this person has DID, or actually they don't even use DID anymore. The shaman will see something different. So the diagnosis is different, and then the treatments are different. So there are, in fact, treatments within a spirit model for these things. And if the question is whether one works better than the other, again, the ones I can personally speak to are entheogens for things like depression, and the answer is a definitive yes.
Yeah.
Question. It is a miracle cure. That, and I mean, the other part of it is you would know it from looking at Fatso, but the other part of it is regular exercise, which I wasn't doing when I was depressed. But when I get depressed, mushrooms. And that's why it works.
Right.
It works in palliative care for people dealing with things like anxiety and grief. So things that we would give, pills that don't work for the shamans, again, problematic term, blah, 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 caveat. There are
Sure, but there's I mean, there's Chinese medicine. I mean, I remember taking my sister to Chinatown and getting the whole tongue diagnosis and then the herbal cure and then bam, fixed right up.
So I guess at a macro level, what we can say, and it is what is emerging is the opportunity that should be seized to kind of assert sovereignty over how you treat like health imbalance and disease within your life. And this is why I'm optimistic in the medium term. People can find this information out. You see that with parents that are sort of being bullied to get their kids onto pills, that they go home, they spend the night up on the internet finding information, and that begins a very long journey of weighing information and being informed. And it's wonderful. Like, this is a thing you have to do. It's just it's obviously like health different for every person, but that's kind of why you need to assert sovereignty on an individual basis over it.
Absolutely. And as a parent, one of the reasons I didn't want to comment is that it has to be, if I say, well, this is what I've done, and there will be hordes of people screaming, that's not right. And if I say, well, I've done the opposite, there will be hordes of people screaming one way or the other. So it's entirely, it is something that people have to sort out at this point for themselves, because there is a lot of obfuscation going on, and this is where some good information gathering spirits can help out. Like,
absolutely.
Bring when I do healings for people, sometimes the trick is not so much the direct healing as it is getting them to the right people.
Yeah, well, what other vector is this stuff going to come to? Are people really hoping for the long odds miracle? That's a really dumb thing to. It's a great thing to pray for, but it's a really dumb thing to enchant for.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think before we get to the sigils, I just need to make sure, because I feel, don't know why we should feel too guilty for whatever the hell is going on with Google, but it is what it is. On the brighter side, don't stream just related. I don't know. That's not a question. Kind of spoke about animistic shamanic consciousness. Increasing general good luck and weirdness apart from the obvious advantage of offerings. Well, I do that. That's a sigil question. I'll come straight back to that one. All right. I think we've nailed the ones that people were... Oh, no, I've got one from the group. We've almost answered that. That's convenient, because it would have been long. I would love to hear your thoughts and any advice you'd give on adapting older magical arts into a more modern chaos frame, specifically but not limited to the PGM, Goetia, and Cyprian, and just do it. Try it out. Things will go wrong. That's what I did. That's why mine is, I will say, whilst willing to try new things, the last 5 or so years, a lot of the magic has been traditional spirits and saints, and from a grimoire perspective, I rarely get older than the Hygromantia. I PGM and Hygromantia, and that's a personal choice. But they work better. But they work better because they're so far back in history that they are the least kind of complete. So just kind of answering this question. A lot of the PGM is fragmentary. We're kind of guessing at some of the barbarous names. You were dealing with, particularly in that case, it was never even a book. It was this wizard in Thebes who had a whole bunch of different spells that he just kind of bundled, and then they were bought later. So there isn't actually a right way of doing it, and that's kind of the trick.
Exactly.
Try it.
Exactly. It's when people talk about the PGM as, well, this is the way that all magic was done at the time. Like, this is not like some standard edition that happened. This is like one dude's collection.
But the collection itself was incomplete. So for me, it helps to have done kind of film and theatre maybe because you get, speaking of the spectrum, you get a lot of people in the more magical order side of things that really need things. A lot of backroom IT type people who really need things like this is exactly how you do things. Like they're reading I don't know, a circuit graph, right? But it's if you do theatre, a script is not a finished product. A script is, the play is a finished product. The script is a piece of the play, but so are the actors and the set and the lighting and everything else. So when I see the PGM, it's 20%. You're literally getting it's notes on a script. It's basically first draft on a script. It's not the play. So you're the director. The bear spell at the back, which is a modified PGM. So at the back of Chaos Protocols, I have used tea light candles in the shape of the constellation on the kind of spell space, and I thought, well, they probably didn't do that, but it's great. That kind of stuff is what I do when I put my play on.
It's necessary, and Mike Cacciatelli was very good at that too.
Very good at it.
What he is very good.
Past life.
He's still
Rest
around. Talked with him just last week, in fact. But but he's not afraid to kind of take things and bring it up and add a little bit to it and as necessary. But then there are people who just want to stick to it blindly, and I'm kind of like, you don't even know what these symbols and words mean other than they're old. So, oh my God, they're old. They're so old. They've got to be really magical. They're so old. And so there's that. But, that said, when it comes to adaptation, I try to be fairly systematic about it. So I look at something and I say, how close can I get with reasonable effort without going completely bonkers insane or spending, a king's fortune, to get it as close to the book as possible, and then do that, because there's something in the doing of it that you is always different than the reading. And then when it comes to streamlining, it's like, well, what really is superfluous? And let's do it without that component.
Yeah, so that was going to be the next bit, which is not only just do it, but the first one is the dress rehearsal. Like, it's not the dress rehearsal, but you learn what you can and can't take out after you've done it. So to answer the question, adapting older magical arts into a more modern chaos frame, specifically not limited to, you try them out and you work out which ones. Funnily enough, when you were saying putting some effort into it, the piece that I'm probably not describing very well is when I do that, I do it from so what was the world like? Which means you kind of, I joke with Geraldine in London or Atlantis Books about this, that there needs to be a Doreen Kingsley guide to the world of the PGM or the world of Goetia with pictures of what people ate and what they look like and so on. Because it seems like for a lot of people trying to find the mouthfeel of earlier spells, if you just look in the magic books, you won't find them. You actually need to find them in, well, what did the books look like? How are they bound? But also, what did these people eat? Was this actually a job? Was this clandestine? And you again, because it's theatre, you kind of find the character that way. And that's really useful for when you want to adapt it. Because, frankly, my favorite food in the world is Eastern Mediterranean, particularly kind of Lebanon down to sort of like the northern, basically to Jerusalem, I think is the best food in the world. It also happens to be the Eastern Mediterranean where we have a lot of these spells and books from. So these are the things I cook. I'm kind of halfway there. Like, not only when it comes to offerings, but I can make the house smell like that. And I know, I can buy wine at my Marks and Spencer that's grown on Thera. That helps, But I can build it together is it genuinely is a theatre piece, and it's very Golden Dawn in that sense, and that kind of gives you the space to start pushing with it. Because then you do extremely modern things, like as I said, put the tea light candles in the shape of the constellation, and go with it from there. But that's me. That's how it would work.
Well, that is really important. One of the things that opened up sort of new visions when I was studying Tantra was not only studying the how to books and the texts and the instructions from the lamas, but the biographies of different saints at different periods. You know, Ralo Tsawa, who is this big Yamantaka practitioner. I mean, he was a black magician extraordinaire. I mean, he's just like killing people, racking up money left, right, and center. But you get this feeling and this insight, a theory of mind, really, for the time that this was taking place. And two, you can deconstruct a lot of the stuff that gets laid onto it. So, for instance, in the case of Tantra, nowadays when people go to see a lama come visiting, maybe they'll go and get Vajrakalaya. They'll get this text that takes like an hour to recite. And they'll actually be saying, like, I visualize myself as the great and glorious Kurukula who is naked and 16 years old. And, you know, there's nothing weirder than like a bunch of celibate men in a room talking about how they're visualizing themselves as naked girls in the air. But
that is weird.
So they're chanting all this. And so, you know, in talking with lamas, I would say, well, this wasn't how it was done. And so the monks would say, oh, yes, it wasn't done that way. And how wonderful it is that we don't have to meditate like that anymore. Our lamas have put these in these wonderful long prayers that take 3 hours to recite. So we just have to recite it. We don't have to meditate or exercise the mental, get good at the skill or anything like that. And I'm just like, yeah, it's Glenn Mullen once told me, he's like, you know, there's so much of Tibetan Buddhism is involved in keeping monks busy.
Yeah, that's
and that if you're
right.
not involved, you know, if you're not interested in that, then you have to start looking at it the way of not only yogis and non-monastics, but outside of the theocracy of Tibet, because at this point, even the Ngakpas are very have their own sort of monastic influence. But there's a certain degree to which I think the not the Peter principle, the Parkinson's law plays into some old magic. You know, we have X amount of time available for this and X amount of resources. Let's fill it.
Yeah,
you know,
potentially.
Yeah.
When you're talking about, I mean, the mystic rituals got fairly baroque, but when you're talking about practical enchantment, yes. I mean, the stuff that I'm interested in is the non-core, is not the folk. That's politically the not right term for it. But people who would use these things, who would get a papyrus picture of a Garthos demon or something, and how that illiterate person would then use that because they vaguely knew what it was. They were told. They probably bought it. What did they do? What did they do when they got back to their little house with this thing? You have a range of options, and I agree. I think a lot of some of the stuff that's in there it might just be filling time, especially for once you get into the grimoires. I think actually I've spoken to Peter and Alkistis about this. I think there's one of the influences that isn't looked at enough, I would suggest, is the ecclesiastical influence. Because if you actually find, you know, some of the main ones in the middle there were monks anyway. Basically all of them learned in monasteries. This is where the books were kept. But you're dealing with monks and people with a filling time ritual kind of life. That's actually what you're dealing with. And that piece needs to be unpicked. It also needs to be fed into, I think one of the things we maybe don't elevate enough is the sort of banishing and exorcism component, which again is a piece of that vector. Anyway, this is we need to move on to the other questions. Like we can talk
Oh,
about the grimoire stuff later because I think that's good. I think that question's answered though, which is we went with it's theater, kind of find the world, experiment with it, and again, it comes back to what I say all the time, and I know it upsets people, but if you do it, if you upset the spirit, you'll know about it.
yeah.
If you
If
haven't, you haven't.
right, right. I would say everything you take out, look for look for what you're losing because you're losing something, but it's not necessarily something you need or worth the effort
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay.
And also we have different practices now. So somebody modern day who is doing 40 minutes of meditation a day, who is doing serious energetic practices every day, is going to not who maybe is involved in some kind of purification practice constantly is not necessarily going to need the 9-day Solomonic bath.
No, and we can do things they
Yeah.
can't. Like for the Headless Ride in Chaos Protocols, I say get the app. The Sky at Night 2 app is the one I use. And if Orion's in the sky, fair enough, there he is. If he's not, wave it around on the ground, and you can do things that the magicians in Alexandria couldn't do, which is you can find Orion on the other side of the planet. Orion under the ground. He was
That's it.
just under the frickin' ground to them. So there are pieces you can bring to it that they would have given their back teeth to have access to. So whilst we've lost some stuff, but we've gained things, and spirits effing love that. That in particular, yeah.
Even the framing of things. I was talking about the Theosophists and the whole mental plane and the Akashic Library. They didn't have websites. They didn't have code. So they framed things in terms of these Akashic libraries. But the Akashic Library, if there is any, whatever the mental plane, the informational plane, where there's not there's still separation of information, but not space in the way that might exist on astral etheric planes, then we have better metaphors for that now than we did even 100 years ago, and certainly more than 1,000 years ago. So our minds are a little like the talking boards for spirits, where they can kind of go in there and say, okay, let me explain it this way. And, unfortunately you have people that, if you explain it in very modern terms, they'll,
Well, yes. Well, this is you basically just that's about 40% of what I talk about with the UFO phenomenon in starships, which is that we're speaking a mythic language, and you couldn't show up in a triangular craft. You couldn't appear as a triangular craft in Alexandria and expect to be understood the same way you can in the world of post-flight, which is why they didn't show up as that. And we're dealing with, again, it's kind of funny enough. This is going to lead into the next question. We are dealing with, when you're dealing with the mythic or the imaginal, and I mean both those words literally, as you know, rather than making it up. I don't understand why so many magicians are so really crude when it comes to materialism. Like, they don't use words like imaginal or mythic. They use them the way Neil deGrasse Tyson will use them. And you go, well, that's wrong, isn't it? Anyway,
right.
That's a little side rant. When I say mythic or imaginal, I mean these things have an ontological reality. Magic is kind of it's a school of music in that mythic or imaginal world, which is why this question of if things aren't working with sigils, is there a checklist you can run down? There isn't. There isn't, because of everything we just discussed. Because we're not, doing repairs on an aeroplane. Where this is an artist design system used in a very non-linear, very creative and imaginal realm. So, yeah, that's not the checklist. Anyway, we're onto the sigils questions, which is good. I just thought that was a reasonably good segue from what you were talking about into. I think we need to think a little less materialist. It's funny that that's happened, and I wonder if it's because we don't read. I wonder if it's because we don't read the kind of philosophers that we should. I don't know. I don't think our understanding of the classical world is that good. So we inherit what words like imagination and mind and materialism mean from a materialist culture, and it struggles with the eternal and embarrassing kind of like psychology spirit model. No one is using either of those words correctly.
Right.
And I don't think anyone should be like, you should be banned from the discussion until you've, at least read the top five of, like at least read some classical Greek philosophy to kind of get where, because all of these discussions were happening back then, and they were just better at it because they could use these terms, and I find that really interesting. Like philosophers in particular had a uneasy relationship. Had a very mature relationship to kind of like the gods and so on. They were asking, are these real? Are these in our head? Do they even
Sure.
need to be worshipped? And we're doing it in a really simplistic and baseline way that's embarrassing. And it's very easy to solve if, you put down those books and you pick up these ones, which happen to be free and available on your phone,
There is this sort of swing back where, we in the 20th century things got over in the it's all in your mind, it's all in your brain, yours, not even the I mean, first collective unconscious and then really like specific, like it's all in your head.
Yeah.
And then there's the sort of snapback, which 10 years, 15 years ago, I was like, oh, thank God people are getting out of this head space. But then they ran right over to another extreme where it's like, well, no, Michael is a guy, is a spirit named Michael out there. He's named Michael for reals. Name that by God. Humans had nothing to do with it. He's just there, and
You would have to go back 1,500 years to find a pope stupid enough to think that.
Right, exactly. But we magicians run to these extremes, and for people that are supposed to be adept at dealing with the subtle,
that's the bit that I don't understand. That's actually
really bad overall.
And I think it's because it's too, people don't realize how embedded they still are in monoculture when they're engaging with this stuff, because they're literally taking over a Neil deGrasse Tyson view of materialism to something that, I mean, he's truly moronic when it comes to thinking philosophy can't tell us anything about the world and basically everything else in his life. But in particular that, because not only were these ideas discussed by like the smartest people in the classical world, wasn't even solved, but they did a better job of it than us, and their work is right there for people to read. And we used to, like the sort of middle class or bourgeois magician, particularly when we're talking about the ecclesiastical influence, had to read these. Once Plato had been translated, so everything after the Renaissance, you have this. But even reading Aristotle is better than not, even though I don't like the Aristotelian model. But we can't even say that. Like, it's all in your head, or no, it's all external. I mean, do you mean that in a Platonic sense? Do you mean that in a Neoplatonic sense? Do you mean that, like, what do you even mean by the external world if these things are there? And that's the bit, I think, funny enough, it's kind of like the pharma discussion. I think in the medium term, I'm quietly optimistic, because there has been a swing back, and I think people are starting to realize their own absurdity at maybe taking a literal spirit model too far.
Yeah.
I don't perceive that the pendulum then swings all the way back to it's all in your head. I actually think we have the opportunity now to go, well, okay, as we approach the middle, let's see if there are other ways to talk about, or not to talk about, but to think about mind and how these things are a component of it. Because I stress again, we did. People were talking about it, and you know what? What's even better about it? They were talking about it ages ago. So it's old. It's old like the PGM. They should love it.
and the fine points. I'm talking with some people, and they're like, oh, emptiness. And of course, I have a background in Buddhism. So I'm like, yeah, but what kind? Zhentong, Rangtong, I mean, these things have uh, fine points that get discussed. What do you specifically mean by that? And oh, well, I don't know, really.
Yeah.
So it's these things become not. It's not to try and make what we're doing fit those models so much as it is to realize that there is so much more out there than, or so many more shades of view than just it's real or it's not.
That's the bit that binary I think is really savage, and you
And
literally have to go back
that's the
1,500
age
years
of
to find
reason,
it. Yeah.
That's the age of reason. People stopped interpreting biblical stories as powerful myths that had truth to them, and started looking for cosmological reality of how things are physically laid out. And
But so when
obviously,
you say it's age of reason, what you're saying is it's monoculture because that's how monoculture treats things. Kim Kardashian is real or she's not, and it's really unbecoming of magicians that we have that binary, and I think it's embarrassing. But fortunately, again, on the good news side, I actually think people are interested in. I think they're interested in reading church fathers and apologetics because there's some weird stuff about uh, how God can be manifest in physical things. Like there's some really cool shit in there, and it's all free. It's freely available. And
people talk about Christianity. It drives me crazy because it's like, well, you've got, even in the modern world, you've got the apophatic Christianity, you've got emergent Christianity, you've got all these different views out there. You just don't hear a lot about them because they're not trying to affect how biology is taught in your school.
yeah, yeah.
So it's a lot to that. So anyway,
Nice one.
sigils.
So we come down to it. You can have the first question. What do you do if they're not working?
Um, I don't think there's a mechanics checklist, but I do think that you can kind of. We do a lot of workshopping of stuff in strategic sorcery. We have a big group, like 500 and some odd people, and obviously I put, like, on the blog there are testimonials of this worked and it was great, and but in the group I really encourage people to be like, what didn't work, and let's talk about it, and why. So I mean, there are all kinds of things where people are interpreting their divinations according to their own biases. I forget the name of the bias now. I can't even remember. But so are you trying to affect something that is simply as improbable as making it snow in July?
Yeah.
Is this, in Andrew Chumley's terms, is that where the point of transmutation lies, or not? Because it might not be. That might just be something that you are not going to be able, your influence on probability is there. But if it was 1 in 18 million and you've cut that in half, it's still 1 in 9 million. So it's not very likely, to happen.
So I think,
So,
like,
so this is where the optionality comes back.
Yeah.
Like, create other types of options to go about things in the same way. What powers are you using? If people are calling on planetary powers that are, if you're into astrology, they're bad in their horoscope or ill-dignified or retrograded or whatever, well, there's more than one way to skill a cat. To skin a cat. There is no planet that cannot be applied to almost any purpose. If you look at them in different ways. I know we had our thing about Jupiter, so I don't want to get into that. But
but what you were saying, like, if they're not working, it's do more of it. Like, because some of them won't work. Like this, especially this is why I like sigils. If it's not working, do more of them.
Hit it from a different angle.
But
Hit it from a different.
even just in volume, because one of the things that I think especially if people are new and it's kind of like, I'll do these five and I'll see what happens. I'm like, no, dummy, do 100. Like, literally do sigils. I've used examples before, getting seats on the bus, encountering celebrities. But there are other, like, there are literally anything you can, in sigil for. Um, Finding misshapen vegetables that look like penises and vaginas, because that's always hilarious. Like, literally just get a whole bunch of these things that make life interesting and weird, and just keep throwing them at it. Because two things happen: either you quote unquote get better at it, or your understanding of how magic and reality work will start kicking over in the unconscious. If it doesn't work, move on, do other ones. I mean, there is potentially and in fact, it's quite likely that the the target is misaligned. I still get people saying, "I read your book, I loved it. I did a sigil to get my girlfriend back, and she didn't come back." I'm like, right. The Chaos Protocols. You read? Is that the book you read? So there's definitely there's a goal component of it there, but at the moment, it's just do more. Like, they don't cost anything. You're not going to run out.
Yeah.
Again, this is why I think it's such a really good lab to be able to do multiple sigils in this sort of environment. They cost nothing. Do more of them. If it didn't work, fine.
And try different styles.
Sure.
There's of course the combine English letters into a sigil, but there are ways that you can evoke a feeling. You can even enchant. You can do a folk magic spell or a candle spell, and feel for that pattern that's evoked and translate that into a sigil. One of the reasons that for financial sorcery, the powers that be were like, yeah, what I want to transmit, you need an artist for. So literally, I had Matt Brownlee come over and I did a conjuration in the living room, and he's there doing all the lightning glyphs. And they're literally the pattern of that spell transmitted from 5D into 2D, according to his artistic talent. But you don't need to, you can do it that way. You can talk to spirits and say, can you affect things through a seal that appears to me, and if not, well, will you work through this seal? And so there are all kinds of different ways. There's so much attention paid to the multiple letter sigil. And I'm looking at the sigils behind you, and they don't look like simple multi-letter combos.
Oh, some probably are. I didn't even know they were visible. They've been there for ages. This is the other thing. I literally have no idea what they're for. So that might, like, eventually you forget. Yeah, they're in shot. Fair enough. Yes and no on the letter thing. If, like, you're correct that you can try these different things, but if specifically your sigils aren't working, and if you're doing sigils that look like that, do more of them. That is genuinely the solve. Like, because if they don't work, there's a risk in what you just said. You're correct that any of these things are valid, but why this has been such a very useful system to me is that it is essentially the closest thing we're going to get to laboratory conditions, which is do more of them. And if you stick with that, you will eventually find where the leak is. And the best thing to do is to, like, because you will forget that you insigiled to, like, for random things, like, because no one thinks, I mean, apparently I think about it a lot, but no one thinks about penis and vagina shaped vegetables and fruit that often, right? And so when you encounter it, one, you'll be like, oh, that looks like a wang. Wait a minute. And that kind of future self entanglement, if you do a whole bunch of them, one, you'll see that it works, and two, the next time you come around to do something that maybe has more importance for you, you're going to be a little bit better at it. That's what I like about sigils, that they can scale. Yeah, it's like a lab or a gym, not that I'd know. You have a space where it's interoperable with, like, in theory, you can be an atheist, but it kind of plugs into any system because you can activate them or enchant them, which is the next question. without calling on something. I mean, I do. I've done the
Oh
whole
yeah.
goddamn range. You do end up, and this is a very Pete Carroll thing. You do need to find a like magician or spell casting god form or saint or what have you, or being that you have a particular affinity with, and that would be a recommendation. So I do that. Like mine's St. Cyprian. We've had this discussion, but that's the most common one. When depending on different sort of saint days and so on, I've tried different things, but I think that's another piece that people will need they need a spell casting buddy in a non physical sense, and for me that one's worked quite well. But uh, best sigil activation, and then I have a question mark. Sorry for whoever's question that was that I just kind of wrote down the notes for. Go.
Best sigil magic activation.
Yeah.
You know, I like you am not crazy about the spanking for the sigil. Although it's a good one. You know, I ceremonially call the powers that be and will make the sigil in their presence, and if there are specific spirits connected with it, I'll ask for them to lay their hand upon it. However, the thing that people that are firmly spirit model always forget is that we are spirits.
That's yeah. This kind of
and,
comes back to I really like that. I think it's a hugely useful way of thinking about it. Anyway, carry on.
and so we are connected, and so you know I'll lay my own hand upon it, and man, you know, people for the longest time I was really down on vagueness, down on the god, the goddess, or the powers that be. But there, you know, as I get older, I find something really honest about that. That there's, you know, we're not entirely sure. So let's acknowledge the idea that we don't have the full conception of this thing. And sometimes you can draw up something that isn't necessarily written yet. You know,
Yeah.
an understanding that we have yet to nail down, and add that into it, and just you know, anoint it with oil. I'm a huge you know, I love working with different oils. I hate making oils, so I usually buy them from people. But I love working with oils. Maybe it's the bishop in me, the independent bishop in me, but I love working with oils. And so I'll anoint the sigil and I will place it up in a sacred spot, either on the altar near the appropriate place or somewhere that I can see it regularly. If it's something that I want to carry with me, I'll put it into a little container and carry it. Recently, I did all my, you know, for people, I was doing planetary seals inside these nice little containers that they fit within. You can fit like 7 or 8 in there, and you know, treat it as much as a talisman as a sigil. So I would say that the line between talisman and sigil has blended for me.
Gotcha.
But there's also, you know, there's also something to drawing it in the air and letting it go.
Well, that again, yeah, that's where I was. So what I was going to say is, I think because I've described mine in some detail, or the most common one, and some alternatives in the book. But so the trouble is, and I've written about this a few times on the blog. I used to, when I could, you know, funnily enough, get a seat on the tube coming back from work. This is a couple of jobs ago. I would think of things because you're sort of bulking out that week's sort of launch on the tube, and I'd start to do the thing, and because I can obviously I've done a few with them now, so I can write the statement out without having to. Well, actually, sometimes I do cross out, but like you lose the vowels straight away because you just learn not to write them, and so on. So they're kind of no 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 no. Get off the tube. My partner and I go and have dinner on the high road because I was going to, fix them up when I got home. But several of them had activated in the course of that process. So this is again what I think is quite useful about the space sigils are in. I did nothing. I was not activating it in any way on the tube. None of that. I was genuinely making notes for myself to come home to do it. And they started activating. So again, we get back into that, like, Crowley getting the letter thing. The sigils allow you to think about, well, was I recognizing the outcome was my future state recognizing the outcome in the past, and that was kind of triggering what it was. And it's so, like, best way of activation, again, it just do loads of them. And work out which ones, find how it feels. It's a feeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. That's almost, it's a little bit kumbaya to land on. But running out. Oh, there was one more question. It's a whole giant topic. I might actually do that one a bit later. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about? Just bringing it back to, like, the double book thing? Because how long have we been going? We had the 20-minute. No, we're doing it right. We're coming up in 2 hours.
Yeah. We're coming up on 2 hours. I don't know. I think it's good to hash out the tech.
Yeah.
To hash out the tech a little bit, and a little tidbit. A lot of people on Facebook today were having the magic with or without a K discussion. So you got
to pass the time somehow.
Yeah, you got to pass the time somehow. But as it is, looking at the etymological roots, which I hadn't done in a long, long time. I know it came from Old French and Greek and Persian, but the Proto-Indo-European, the mag, which literally just means make things happen, is the same root as machine. So magic and machine have the same, they believe, the same Proto-Indo-European root, just to make shit happen.
I like that. There's something.
So it's appropriate to discuss the tech of how it's done and how to apply it well. I would say, the big thing is we both believe in, I think, looking for those enchantable probabilities, finding those tipping points that you can actually, they're not 9 million to 1, they're 3 to 1, and you can.
And over time, you learn by doing it. So you learn to approach a problem in pieces from the beginning. So if you are looking to sort of have your partner placed in a new job or what have you, I think about that in a different way. I think about what are the things that are going to be turned into sigils or who I would speak to there. And it's non-obvious. It's not necessarily just the boss fix or whatever off the shelf, which I love. I love the kind of off the shelf magic, but it's not it. And again, like I can remember wanting to not do it wrong at the beginning. Now I don't care. And
there's an interesting thing people go through, though, because you have to think, like, the off the shelf thing. If you're a non-magician, somebody in the community, there was this place in Philadelphia called Harry's Occult. And you would walk in, and it was not much of a shop. There was not a lot to buy. It was a big sign said, "We aim to help," and you'd tell them your problem, and they'd come up with, "This is the stuff you burn. This is the stuff you spread. This is the candle," etc., etc. But when you're a non-magician, the act of doing that and wanting to not do it wrong and to stick to the directions, and even if it's salt, to get it from the occult shop, to get the occult salt, even though it comes from the same place, there's just a lot of juice to that, which is why I think people very often report like immense results in their earliest magical experiments, and then kind of a drop off, because then they're sort of like, well, if they then try to become magicians or sorcerers, it's like, well, how does this stuff work, and why? And then they lose that initial kind of first timer juju, and they start getting into it, and then it takes a little while for them to actually build up the proper amount, to really, not proper according to a recipe of doing it right, but to have the confidence in the juju in without having it be this big mysterious thing that gives it to them. So yeah, there's something to that off the shelf stuff when you're just at it. Now that said, I have a healthy respect for materia and the experts in it, which is why, like I said, if I need to mess around with an oil myself,
I'd buy mine.
Makes it, then I'll make it. But otherwise, I'll buy it. I'll let Jesse make it. So
yes, but like specifically on the probabilistic thing, you learn by doing them wrong. You learn by like, okay, or even you learn by doing it right and not getting the result you want. That's actually tends to be it. So I had, I think this was one of the questions I didn't get to, but a specific example of getting a target wrong, and talk about rookie mistake. I mean, this is from January. Getting a target wrong and actually having it like eventuate, but not what I wanted. I had I part owned my previous employer, the one that I spent 6 months engineering my exit from at the end of last year. And so obviously the next step was, well, I want my shares or my investment sold, which meant so I was kind of enchanting for that, and I figured it meant the business would be sold and so on. What actually happened, and I wanted it done quickly. I would like that this has to happen as soon as possible. So I kind of went to the highest, lowest authority for this, which is who I go to for contract stuff. I said, this needs to happen quickly. I need my shares sold. And they were, because it turns out that there's a clause in the contract that allows the company to buy them back at the previous valuation of the business, which they keep artificially low, the usual trick. Which they keep artificially low. So I got like £100 for these shares. But everything I want happened. And I'm like, right. I'm really surprised I fell for that. That was January 2016. But it's an example of going, okay, so that's what happened. You said, sell my shares fast. And that happened. You didn't actually put anything in. And it's I cannot believe I did. I honestly thought I was trying to obliquely get the whole business sold by doing that.
Yeah.
That's because I genuinely go obliquely at goals because one, it's easier to kind of lose the fabled lust of result if you're enchanting for the holiday that you will take once you get this job or once that happens, because you can kind of put that out of your head rather than the lack of job. So I was trying to do that by getting the business sold. No, the business remains unsold. And I got my shares. Well, I got my shares bought for a tiny, tiny amount of money. And I'm like, oh, well, I did that. Well done.
It's the ham sandwich problem. The genie make me a ham sandwich. Zap.
Yeah.
I remember many years back now, when I was just trying to get Strategic Sorcery, which was then a side business, off the ground. And, let's enchant. Let's increase, increase volume, increase, scale, without any thought to what scaling it up would actually entail. Very first thing that happens. Okay, well, the first thing we need to do is take this day job that you're spending so much time out and yank. So now you can put more time and effort into this. I'm like, oh no, that's not what I meant. Yeah. It's these kinds of things happen, and there are tricks. A lot of people do money magic, and then they get money, and then they notice increased. Something happens where they have to spend that on something else. And one thing that worked for me to eliminate that, well, two things really. One was enchanting for money left over after all expenses.
Yeah, I can see that.
And then the next one was just automating. So anything that could be automated, automate it so that it's a bill, not an expense, because we think of the bills as something that must be covered. So even if it's a retirement investment, or even if it's you know something else, if you automate it, then it becomes that thing that doesn't get messed with, that can't wait. So
Like with the shares thing, I sort of broke one of my own unofficial rules, which were in place because these are the kind of results you end up getting when you fuck around with it. Because I usually go for the target over, but I don't, like in this particular case, I don't have a lot of confidence. I have zero confidence that the investors are going to get what they think the business is going to be worth by the time it gets sold. So I was trying to race that clock, which was, well, I need to get my money out at what they think it's worth, because they think the business is worth this much, and it's very much worth this, possibly this. One of the reasons I left. So I broke my rule, which was kind of messing specifically with things like asset ownership and money with Magic, because the better way to do it is to bounce around, is to actually find the things you would spend it on, or the things that can only be in place once once the dividend yield comes through, and whatever it is, like you go around it, and I made that mistake.
I know that axiom: enchant for the things that you want to use the money for, not.
No. Not with sigils. It's not what you want to use the money for. It's for things that will be in your life once that money has come through. It's very different because you still kind of get caught. You're still kind of caught on this sort of like want vector, and that's not quite it. It's finding the things that will only be in place once these have happened, and they may not even be directly related. And those are the targets that I like the best for successful wealth magic.
That I get. I think a lot of people have thought of it as yet another way to avoid thinking about money.
Yeah,
like,
but it's still
in
not
which
gonna
case
work.
then they do. They end up with these wonderful experiences, but no retirement savings when they
Yeah.
get 80 or something. So I like to take the money thing head on, and enchant with it, for it, etc. And then I have the money to do what I want with it. And that's worked out for me once I figured out some of the ways to stop the ham sandwich problem from happening.
Yeah. So
And
my
that
solve for
is
the ham
honestly
sandwich
back
is
to offerings. Like, you make offerings as opposed to making demands to then things work out a little more how you want them rather than how you said you wanted them.
yeah.
So
Well, that's a good spot to end on. Now that we're over the 2 hours, and
I think so. Yeah.
very nice. And once again, if my goodness, if people have watched this far, well done. But apologies for the crazy technical difficulties at the beginning.
Yeah, that was nuts.
Yeah.
That was,
Well, Mr. Miller, always a pleasure.
Mr. White.
Thank you kindly, and we shall talk again soon.
Yes, indeed. Have a good night.